Yes, I had the misfortune to be caught up in that yesterday. There was a great parade down Park Lane that I was caught up in. I mean, look, cast your mind back to 9/11 or to 7/7 in London, the atrocities committed then. Imagine if 2 days later, in Paris and Berlin and Toronto, there had been crowds in the streets assembling to celebrate those atrocities.
Yes.
That's exactly what we're seeing on the streets of London today. And where are the police in all of this? Remember, Hamas is a proscribed terrorist organisation.
Yeah, could you tell the BBC that?
Supporting Hamas is actually a criminal offence with a maximum penalty of 14 years in jail. Anybody posting on the internet or protesting in support of Hamas's atrocities should face the full force of the law, and those people who are marching in these marches should be referred to the PREVENT programme. Now, I don't think the PREVENT programme is going to make any change to these people's lives, but the point is, when you see people being referred all the time for issuing tweets and so forth, I think there should be equal enforcement of the law here, and we definitely should see action being taken. You know, increasingly we see the police making a great show about arresting some poor retired pensioner who retweets an innocent limerick. Well, we have evidence in the last week of real, genuine evidence of hate, and the police must show that there is no fear or favour in terms of the application of laws regarding hate.
It's interesting, isn't it, the way I just knew the narrative would switch like this. This isn't Israel's fault. This is the fault of Hamas, who mounted that horrific raid on Saturday morning, committing terrible atrocities, raping women, killing people on their doorstep as soon as they opened the door, just executing them in the street, and, of course, kidnapping more than 100 hostages who are now, we're told, underground in Gaza somewhere. Now, that's what Israel suffered, and I knew pretty swiftly, because you knew Israel would react ruthlessly, would react with great severity, that fairly soon the usual suspects would switch the narrative to evil, bully Israel. This is not Israel's fault. They didn't start this, did they?
They have absolutely every right to defend themselves and to get back their hostages. Let's remember that. They've had people taken from their own territory and brought out of it. And I think you have to actually, yes, ask and question the motivations of those people who've come out in support of Palestine, particularly at this exact time. You know, and there's this curious alignment we've always had now between the left and between the fascist elements of Islam. And that's what we're dealing with here, this very, very anti-democratic, fascistic element of radicals. And, you know, it reminds me somewhat of the Iranian Revolution, when the students allied with a radical fundamentalist to overthrow the Shah of Iran. What happened as soon as the Shah was overthrown, the fundamentalists crushed the students behind. And it's amazing that, you know, Israel is the one example in the region of democracy where women's rights can flourish, where gay rights can flourish. And yet they are the ones who are being stigmatised here by the very people who normally are the ones celebrating women's rights and gay rights. I think it's an outrage.
Let's have a look at some of the scenes unfolding in London last night. Palestinian supporters around the Israeli embassy. Let's have a look at this. I like the guy taking his dogs for a walk. Perhaps not the best place for an evening stroll with your pooches, but extraordinary scenes, you know, as you were just saying.
Some of us
good old Palestine.
Some of us have been warning for years about the dangers of the combination of mass immigration and a policy of multiculturalism. You know, in the 20th century, we got things about right. In the 80s and 90s, Britain's diversity was enriching to our culture. We had a healthy number of about 50,000 immigrants coming over every year. It's now 1.2 million gross. And when there is no incentive, therefore, for people to assimilate into the culture, you're going to get situations like this. And unfortunately, we've been spoon-fed for the last 25 years this idea that diversity is our greatest strength, without any evidence being put in defence of it. Whereas we're seeing the reality now. There's an increase in sectarianism, whether it be these scenes or whether it be the violence we saw between Hindus and Muslims in Leicester recently. If you're going to import the world, unfortunately, you're going to import some of the world's problems. But when you import it on such a scale as we're seeing now, it becomes an extremely dangerous threat to this country in terms of social unrest and in terms of harmony. You know, contrast the scenes we've seen in Sydney. It's not just a British thing. Sydney, Toronto, New York, all having this. Contrast that with the scenes we're seeing in Tokyo or Warsaw, much more homogenous. There is none of this on the ground. This is a real problem, and I would hope that the scenes we're seeing today will spur people to action, to actually think of how we can best deal with this. And the first way is to actually stop mass immigration and bring it down to much more manageable numbers.